Good afternoon. My name's Chris Horning. I work over at the I work over I work over at the Wellness Center on the student health promotion team. And in the process of the last months or so, that started last semester, we came up with the idea of Tommies Unplugged, which kind of stems from observations and the idea that college students and just kind of people in general in our time frame, our generation, use technology quite a bit. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Technology's helped us get a lot of things done and be a lot more productive with our time. But on the flip side, technology can kind of have the anti-productivity, and then as research is now showing kind of an idea of it can go against measures of health and well-being as well. So the idea of Tommies Unplugged is we know technology is definitely necessary in many aspects of life, but how can we use it more productively, more mindfully, and just overall better? So with that in mind, we have the Technology Mindfulness Week going on this week, which starts today with this lecture. And there are a couple events. There's two today. Thursday is going to be our technology challenge day, which we are encouraging people to go without phones, laptops, iPads, MP3 players in general for purposes other than work and school, in the hopes that people might just get a better understanding of how they use their technology and maybe be able to use it better in the future. It's just kind of at this point, it's really just a thought experiment to get people thinking about how they use their technology. So I have these cards up front here, which kind of highlight all of the events throughout the week. And there's also stickers and tattoos, because on that Thursday, where we're encouraging everybody to go without their phones over combo hour, if you have a sticker or tattoo, you can get free coffee at the Loft between 12 and 1. So that's kind of it about me. Next, we have Dr. Carol Bruess, who is pretty special. She's kind of a big deal. She just had an article in the newsroom a couple weeks ago. She's kind of all over. She's one of the busiest people I know. And she's involved in a lot. And she's been kind of helping along with this project, as well as some other projects we're doing technology related. And she's an expert in her field. We're happy to have her and welcoming her in kicking off the first annual Technology Mindfulness Week.
I figure if the technology fails today, I'll just say it's because I'm unplugging already. Thank you, Chris, so much for that introduction. When he said she's all over the place, he means it, as in like, I'm all over the place. Not always a good thing. This sounds a little loud. Do you think I should move this down? I don't want to annoy people. How's that? Is that a little better? Yeah, cool. So as Chris said, I'm in communication and journalism. I direct the family studies program, and I want to get this out here right away. I'm a lover of technology. So this today is not about tech bashing. I'm not a tech hater. I'm not a tech naysayer. In fact, I love everything. I got my Apple Watch. I got my iPads, my iMac. I've got, I answer phone calls on my watch. And I'm an emoji fanatic. In fact, my students, some of you are here today, know this. I've gotten all these gifts from students: emoji socks, emoji Band-Aids, emoji candy, emoji puffy stickers, emoji regular stickers, emoji books, emoji lip gloss, emoji magnets, and from my mother, some solar-powered emoji, what do you call these? Happy plastic things? I know. So this is not about bashing the tech, but what today is about is talking about, and what I'm going to argue is that we all have to develop a much more self-aware relationship with our technology. Why? Because the research is starting to pile up on this. And in so many ways, this technology that we love and we use and rely on, and it does lots of really great things for us as humans. We're starting to notice that it is causing some problems. For instance, even in the middle of some of our most intimate moments, like when we're at funerals, people are texting. I'll talk in a little bit about the research. When people are having sex, Can we say that? Sex, when people are in their most intimate moments, they're admitting that they're actually turning to their phones, to Facebook and text and use social media. And so for a lot of us, it's not actually helping us achieve what we want to achieve, which is, like Chris was saying, great health, great relationships, great sleep, focused attention spans, better grades, all that kind of stuff. And as research and author Sherry Turkle of MIT, who I'm going to talk a lot about today, shout out to Sherry Turkle, what she says and points out over and over and over again is that there's something about technology that has this seductive undertow in our lives, that it's super seductive. She talks about it in her book, Reclaiming Conversation. It's a lot like climate change. She uses that as an analogy. That day to day, when you think about it, most of us feel safe in our homes, right? Most of us feel safe in our homes, and a lot of us aren't thinking about 30 years from now. I mean, some of us are worried about it, but day to day, we look at the warm weather out here and we go, a little freaky for Minnesota in February, but maybe it's And when it comes to technology, what Sherry Turkle is saying, and so many other researchers saying, is that we aren't necessarily noticing the subtle but profound shifts in our digital and human worlds, like the way technology is actually changing our brains. We don't see it. We might feel a little bit about it, but we're not seeing it unless we're the neuroscientists. And there's this temptation to think that we can just go on the way we are and everything's going to be okay. And there are some researchers out there who are arguing this isn't as bad as it might seem. And yet the reality is, in the research, a lot of it is suggesting, and I'm guessing surely many of you here today will have experienced it yourself, that one change is very real. And as Sherry Turkle says, one thing is so real. We rarely give each other our full attention anymore. We rarely do this. And yet we've forgotten how unusual this has become. We've forgotten that most young people are growing up without ever having experienced unbroken conversations. Many of us have not ever experienced unitasking or single tasking. And I love it. A lot of you are nodding your heads. We're forgetting that most of us, and the world encourages it and rewards it, most of us engage in constant multitasking. The majority of us feel, and I'm wondering if you agree that this is your experience, a sense of panic if we've forgotten our phones when we leave our homes or apartments. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nodding. We're more likely to forget our underwear than our phones. That's not a scientific poll. It's just a poll. So my message today over the next 30 minutes or so is really going to be, as this week is all about, let's become much more mindful of what's going on so we can make different, more mindful choices, so that we can make those choices that will help us be better sons and daughters and parents, students, roommates, peers, friends, strangers in the world, people checking out at Target without being on our phones and actually engaging in human conversation, as employees, as neighbors. And what I'm going to do is try to convince you that this is really important by sharing the latest and the best research on the topic. So I thought we should start with the brain. Kind of important, these brains of ours. So last week, actually the week before last, I was in a hotel and I clicked on the TV, and this is where I'm not so good with tech, those big devices with all the buttons, and then you're like, I don't know how to use it. And up popped the Today Show. So I was like, good, I'll watch the Today Show. And this was just coming on. And it was so I'm like, ooh, yeah, I always want to know more. This 3 minutes best describes what's really going on with our brains. So I thought we'd start by watching this. One of the best neuroscientists in the world. Here, let me turn this. I had it all clicked to fancy kind of come up, but tech guy says it's not working.
Okay, well, from social media to emails to the internet, technology can be very distracting, and studies also show that it has a negative impact on our brains. So what can we do? We have some easy solutions to help with that distracted brain of yours.
Like most of us, Adam Ghazali was drowning in distractions. Technology had control of his life.
Were you ever called out in your personal relationships, like, hello, you're not listening, you're distracted?
Yes.
Ghazali's also a renowned neuroscientist.
We forage for information the way other animals forage for food for survival. So we have this almost voracious appetite for information.
So he made his personal struggle with distractions his work and found all this technology is actually hurting our brains. Multiple studies show tech distractions are a major cause of anxiety, memory, and sleep problems, poorer relations with family and friends, even lower performance at school and work.
Do you think this is actually a public health crisis?
It would fall in that category, and we should take it seriously.
Now in his book, The Distracted Mind, Ghazali has the steps we all need to take to better cope with technology and be happier and healthier. Step number 1, simply be aware.
I'm now aware that when I'm having a conversation with my loved one and I'm on my phone, this quality is diminished. Or when I'm trying to do an email and I'm also on a conference call, they're both diminished.
The belief is that actually women were better at multitasking than men. It's a badge of honor about how I can multitask. You're telling me it's not good for me, and in fact, I'm not doing it at an optimal level.
Really what you're doing is you're switching the brain networks associated with each of them as you move from one to the other. With each switch between the networks, there's a little bit of loss of the quality of that information that you're holding. That's the degradation that we see in performance.
That leads to step number 2. Set boundaries with technology.
I will say, okay, from 9 to 11, I'm going to multitask away. I'm going to be on email, I'm going to have music on, I'm going to check Facebook every once in a while, because the things I'm doing are just low level, they're boring. But from 11 to noon, I'm going to focus on that article I'm writing, and I'm going to do one thing. I'm just going to give it singular attention, because I know that that's how you get the highest quality.
Step number 3, don't forget to take small breaks. Studies show quick cardio workouts, breaks for socializing, even 5-minute walks outside can recharge your brain and make it less vulnerable to distractions.
Those breaks really give a period of restoration. They can also help with the burden of anxiety and boredom.
Ghazali's also using tech to help. At his lab at the University of California, San Francisco, he's developing the Body Brain Trainer, an experimental video game that works you physically and mentally to boost your attention skills.
It's working with my perception, with my processing, with my physical. I'm thinking, I'm having fun.
So this could improve your attention system so that you're more capable of focusing on something when that is your goal.
Well, that just ended. What he was about to say, Gonzalez, what he was about to say is to make the argument for mindfulness, as you started to hear him say, to make the argument that we can make these choices when we're more mindful to help our brains, which are changing. Some of the research on these brain changes, it's what freaks me out the most, because we are putting our children, for instance, our children and our grandchildren, into an experiment. We don't know the long-term effects right now. So we are, but they especially are the experiment. The little potty chairs with the iPad holders, we should be concerned about those. And we won't know for sure until we have about 30 more years of research, but do we want our kids to be those experiments? Our kids, our grandkids, our nieces, our nephews. So let's turn from the brain to human interaction. Much of what we're going to talk about the rest of the day, not that these two things are, not connected, of course, but let's talk about when we add tech into our human interaction, what's going on? How's it affecting us as friends and children and parents and all that? So last year, I published a 530-page volume on how tech is affecting family and couple relationships in particular. Don't buy this book. It will bore you to tears, I promise. It's really meant for other researchers. But in the process of putting together this book, which involved 22 research teams from across the country, what I did was keep a list of what I think are some of the biggest eye-openers when it comes to tech and human interaction. What some of the best research is, what are some of those moments where I was like, ooh, gosh, that's an inconvenient truth. I didn't want to know that, but I should be paying attention. And so what I'd like to do is share, and what I've decided to do for the rest of today is share with you what I think some of those are, those things that we really should be paying attention to. And there are those moments you might go, holy cow, yeah, I didn't want to know that. And as I go through them, I'd like you to keep in mind this basic question. Again, hopefully why you're all here today and participating in this week. How might I be more mindful of my technology use? And again, should I be making some different, more mindful choices? The overarching eye-opener for me, if I would put them all into one kind of bucket or umbrella, I'm mixing metaphors now, is this idea that we are living in an always-on environment. And the sub-question, which I'm going to end with today, is it addiction? Is it addiction? And looking at the research right now, it was an eye-opener to me. So the research is pretty clear. Almost all of us in the US and outside of the US are living in this always-on environment, a state of perpetual contact. Over 96% of the world's population now uses mobile phone technology. We are reachable anywhere, anytime. And we don't just love our phones, we love our smartphones. So according to Pew Research Center, almost 70% of US adults own smartphones right now. In comparison, 6 years ago, what percentage of people in the US do you think own smartphones? Any guesses? Just 6 years ago. You're close. We'll average those. 35%, doubled. The number of people who use and own smartphones has doubled in 6 years alone. And why should we care about the difference between a non-smartphone and a smartphone? Does anyone even remember in this room using a non-smartphone? You flipped it open or maybe slid it up and you made a call. Not so, great, but not as attractive as the way that we use these Swiss Army knives, little computers we carry around with us and we, have, and we feel panic if we don't have them. They are seductive. They serve so many purposes in our lives, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, and sometimes even in between. Many of you might use sleep apps to track how well you've slept. Most of us don't just own smartphones. 50%, nearly 50% of us never turn off our phones, ever. I actually had to consult with my 20-year-old on how to actually turn the phone all the way off. I didn't know. You don't have to admit if you know. Nearly 50% of us. And in fact, studies show that most adults in the US, if surveyed right now, today, would admit that they can't live without their smartphone. Can't live. What? Of course they might be saying, oh, I can't live without it. But think about that for a second. According to Pew Research, almost 40% of adults have what we call a symbiotic relationship with our mobile devices. And our phones are uniquely attractive to us. They're different, according to the research on this, than other kinds of technology, different than our computers, different than our iPads, different than other kinds of tech. Research on our love affair with phones reveals that cell phones give individuals a feeling of euphoria or feeling valued or loved as they interact with or receive messages from others. The neurochemical high we get from the little buzzes and notifications on our phones are similar, according to the research, to taking a hit of cocaine. I've never done cocaine, so I don't know, But what we do know is that it's similar. According to the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business, Twitter is more addicting than cigarettes. The feeling you get from checking Twitter creates the same temporary high or buzz as a cigarette break. I don't smoke cigarettes either. So I went to this research. A group of researchers in 2013 found that receiving a ping or a like or a notification, the buzz, the little, ooh, someone's calling. I'm kidding, no one's calling, is similar in our brains, the chemical reaction in our brains, to having sex. I said it again. I said the word sex 5 times now today. 80% of people sleep with their phones. So this idea that the little ping feels good, the little buzz, ooh, I like that. We are being neurochemically rewarded to keep coming back to those. It's why we love our smartphones so much. And yet, this is the one I can't quite understand. The 10% of humans who admit that they check their phone during sex, 10%. Like double bonus? I'm not sure. So what we do know is that polls are revealing that about 40% of people say they ditched their toothbrush before they would ditch their iPhones. They would get rid of their toothbrush. That's disgusting. I'm guessing those are the folks who haven't read the research that your phone harbors more germs and bacteria than the knobs on the bathroom door right outside here. Your phone is one of the filthiest things on you, or even in your environment. So, and that's not fake news. That is real news. You can read the research on it. So, because our smartphones are so highly personalizable, research shows that we are creating this emotional bond with our phones and see phones as an extension of self. How many of you are willing to give up your cell phone number that you've had? No, not many of us. So it's not the device itself, it's what it represents. So here are a few eye-opening stats on how we're using them. The average American adult checks his or her phone every 6.5 minutes. That means that during this lecture, you are going to want to check your phone, or maybe you are because you've gotten really good at the butt check, where you have it underneath you and you're... 25% of teens are digitally connected within 5 minutes of waking up. The similar number of adults are connected within 6.5 minutes of waking up. Most teens and adults are sending about 100, or young adults, I should say, are sending an average of 100 texts a day. And adults in the US attend to their digital devices around 150 times a day. And if you don't believe me, try it. Try noting every time you want to attend to your device. Look at your phone, check something, turn to a computer. So not just a phone, but any digital device. It's shocking. I did it while I was like, no, I don't do that. Yep, I do that. We also know that at any single point, like right now, 10% of all drivers in the US are actively texting, posting to Facebook, or using social media while driving. While physically foot on the gas, we should be concerned about this. As the author earlier, the neuroscientist said, is this a public health crisis? On so many levels, the research is suggesting it is. This is one of them we should be really concerned about. In recent interviews conducted by a whole host of research teams, both younger and older adults, this isn't about young people. This is about old people like me and my friend Kevin Sauter. He gave me the smirk. We're feeling a pull toward our technology, and we're having a very difficult time resisting the urge to check it or respond to it. That blinking light, that buzz, the seductive undertow. So with new realities come new words. So a researcher by the name of Brandon McDaniel, professor of family social science at Illinois State University, has been studying technology and its interference with family relationships, the parent-child relationship in particular, but also couples who are co-parenting their children. And in his research over the last 6 years, he got his PhD at Penn State, he coined this new phrase, technoference. I'm guessing, I'll predict that you're going to see a lot more of this word, and you already know what it means. I mean, the interference that technology is causing us. 38% of individuals report texting or sending emails during a conversation with their intimate partners. 38%. 62% of couples report, and this is in Brandon McDaniel's research, that technology interferes in their couple leisure time at least once a day. 25% of American adults report feeling like they have to answer the phone even when it interrupts a family meal. And we're going to talk about dinner time a little bit later. The bottom line of that research is that the frequency of such interruptions, the frequency of technoference, according to a whole host of studies, is related to lower life satisfaction, lower relationship satisfaction, and greater volumes of depression and anxiety. And this reflects such a profound change in the landscape of families that technology is now, by marriage and family therapists across the country, starting to be considered not as just a tool used by families and couples, but therapists are starting to recognize the phones and the devices, are you ready for this, as family members themselves. So technology is starting to be identified in therapeutic settings as, again, not just something that people use, but because we love it so much and we tend to it so much and it's interfering so much that we have to treat it as if it's another family member. So you don't need to see the details of this, but so for over 50 years, professionals in the field of marriage and family therapy and in the field of family communication, we use this thing called the genogram. You might be familiar with it, you might not. But it's basically, it's kind of like a family tree, but it's a way we map interactions between people. A lot of therapists use it because you can start to identify the ways your system members are interacting. You can identify places where things might be disrupted, where they're strong or weak. So it provides a more specific picture of the way families communicate. On the scene now, because of the research that I'm sharing with you, therapists are starting to have families draw technograms where that device is identified as another family member because of the symbolic nature of what those devices mean to so many families. So the cell phone, the iPad, whatever it is actually identified. And some of the questions that therapists are posing in therapeutic settings for assessing intergenerational technology use and the potential areas of concerns are questions such as, what were the relationships between family members like prior to the development of any technology-based relationships? How does each family member's relationship with technology influence their relationships with others? What is the percentage of communication between family members that occurs face-to-face versus mediated? How much dialogue have various family members had with each other regarding areas of technology-related concerns? Sex-related activities, internet infidelity, internet addiction, online gaming, online family networking, online social networking, online dating, online safety, the list goes on. You can start to see that this has become not an extra when families are in crisis or hurting, but at the center. That should tell us what's going on behind the scenes. So let's talk about not if you're in therapy, because most couples, for instance, only go to therapy after they're really hurting for at least 6 years or feeling a lot of dissatisfaction. But let's talk about basic healthy social situations, friendships, being in social settings. I'd like you to think about this for a minute. How many of you have been to a social gathering recently and made it more than, let's say, 6, 7, 8 minutes without someone in that setting, pulling out a phone? I see people going, no. I see a few older people saying yes. Just kidding, Jan. Wait, yeah, no. The research on this, Sherry Turkle, again, of MIT, other researchers have found that about 90% of cell phone owners say that they have used a phone during their most recent social gathering, during the gathering. Not leaving the gathering to go to the bathroom and, you know, check their Twitter, but actually using it in the social setting. 90%. And a lot of them said it was positive. So again, not just tech bashing, trying to understand what's going on. A lot of them said it was positive. Taking photos or talking about something that they saw. There's a lot of news lately, you know, talking about some of those concepts. And yet, when asked the bottom line question, what do you think it did to the conversation? So of those 90%, what do you think it did to the conversation when the phone entered the social setting? 82% of them said it deteriorated the conversation. It reduced the value, the feeling, the positive conversation, the interactions that went on in that social setting. So let's talk about deterioration for a minute. So what happens when phones enter our most sacred spaces? Like at funerals, as I mentioned before. Sherry Turkle again. I'm quoting from her directly. We're living in an environment where we're doing something that is putting us in conflict, that is not really helping community and friendship. We text during funerals. This is based on her ethnographic research. We text during religious services of all sorts. When I ask people why they do it, they admit it. They say, we text during the boring bits. We text during the boring bits. Turkle goes on to question the funeral texters and the religious service texters with this exasperation, and she says, what does it mean for somebody to say, I went to a funeral and when the funeral got boring, I texted? What have they forgotten about the purpose of a funeral? And what are they teaching their children? Did they forget that the point of the funeral is just to be together with the other people there? So let's talk about another sacred space, the dinner table. Again, as I mentioned before, about 25% of people believe that they need to answer a call even if it comes in during family dinner. In her ethnographic research, Sherry Turkle observed when you watch people at dinner tables, and not just family, but people at dinner tables, and when those folks are on and off their devices and talking to their dinner partners, so if you go over to the View and observe this, and actually have my interpersonal communication students do this experience, hi, welcome. And then you ask them what's going on there. So you see, let's say a group of 6 people, some phones, back and forth. They ask them what's going on there. What Turkle found in her ethnographic research was that we have a name for this. It's called the rule of 3. You know what the rule of 3 is? My students saw this last year for themselves. Here's what the rule of 3 is. And this is a direct quote from some young adults in Turkle's study. You wait for 3 people to have their heads up before you put your head down to your phone so you can make sure that some of the conversation persists. The rule of 3. People admit it's not the same as the kind of conversation they'd have if everybody were paying attention. And the experimental research on this, so we had observational research on this, and some researchers were like, we want to study this in a controlled experimental environment to see if this really holds up. The effects go beyond the head bobbing, the down, the up, make sure that 3 people are there. It goes beyond this. One of the most shocking bits of research that I've read is that when you have a phone in between you or on the landscape during the conversation, so it doesn't even have to be just on the table between us, even if it's turned down, but let's say we're having coffee, Hannah and I are having coffee on my phone, or your phone's over here. The research suggests, again, backed up by both experimental and real-life situations out in the field, is that it significantly reduces the chance that we will speak about something of substance, something of consequence. And you know why? Because we've been trained to know that we are likely to be interrupted. So why would I engage with you if I need empathy or share something of importance or of consequence if I believe that I'm likely to get interrupted by that phone that's sitting over there, by that buzz that's about to happen? Again, climate change. We don't really notice it, but this is what's going on. It's changing the ways we're interacting. That single phone on the table, even if it's not right between us, is changing the ways that we're interacting. Turkle uses this analogy. Would you, if you're having a conversation with a friend or a partner, or a loved one or a child, would you take out a book and just start reading it? Would you just open up a book and just turn to a page and say, oh, excuse me, I'm just going to read a little bit of my book here? No, we wouldn't do that. And yet we're so in love with, we're so rewarded by what's going on our phones that we're likely to do this. And people, according to the research, and maybe you would agree, people have to work hard to not feel devalued when they're being put on pause over and over and over again. Even really sort of confident adults, those of us who have had life experiences, or now think about children feeling devalued when being put on pause. So let's talk about human empathy for a minute. How does this all affect our abilities to be empathic human beings? The news on this, the research on this, not so good. The research is suggesting that our over-reliance on devices is harming our ability to have the face-to-face conversations, the most human things that we can do. And how much is our ability to empathize going down? According to a meta-analysis using 72 studies over decades, found that there has been a 40% drop in measures of empathy among college students in the last 20 years. 40% drop. And although we don't know for sure why, the researchers theorize that a whole host of things going on, but primarily, or at least substantially, it's because we have less eye contact. We're missing these moments of eye contact day in, day out, day in, day out. We don't really notice it necessarily. Again, a little bit like climate change. It happens subtly, but that when we don't look at other people in the eyes, we can't train ourselves. We're not being socialized as much to tune into others and what they're feeling and what they're thinking. Think about it today. How many interactions have you had that didn't involve eye contact? I know last night I was in the room next to my 16-year-old and she's texting me, "What's for dinner, Mom?" Like those little moments don't seem like a big deal, but over time, those drops in the bucket, according to the research, we think it has something to do with this. And if we look at family relationships in particular, a lot of us believe or want to believe that it's the teens and adolescents that are the problem tech users, right? We want to be like, yeah, those problems, like my 20-year-old, my 16-year-old, and my niece and my nephews. You might guess it's the parents who are doing most of the complaining about the adolescents and teens on phones. But do you know what our research is showing us now, and I think we should be really disturbed and concerned about this, is that a large and growing discontent is emerging among children of all ages about their parents' use of phones, about their grandparents' addiction to Facebook. And I use the word addiction because, again, I'm not answering that question yet. Turkle found in her research, Sherry Turkle again, that children are begging their parents to put down their phones. I listened to, and I'm a big fan of Sherry Turkle of MIT. I thought it might be helpful to have her tell us a little bit in just a 3-minute clip from an interview she did on one of her first books. Actually, not her first book, but her a couple years ago book called Alone Together. She was interviewed by Terry Gross on Fresh Air. And I'm going to take us right to the point where she's explaining what she is finding with parents and digital distraction. Let's listen in for a second. Just start at 1 minute.
Is people saying to
Hold on.
I assumed that you would be talking about how children and teens are so distracted by texting their friends all the time. But you're talking about children's parents, too, that children's parents are distracted. I want you to describe some of the complaints that children have expressed to you about their parents being distracted by their personal devices.
Yeah, well, what my fieldwork has shown is that children, from the minute these children met this technology, it was the competition. I do my fieldwork in playgrounds, and parents are texting and on cell phones as their kids play on the jungle gyms and the swings, and parents text during breakfast and dinner as their children beg them for attention. Parents text at games when the kids are on the playing field, often missing the big score. Parents are on the phone in cars, and the kids are left to text in the back seat on their devices instead of having those precious moments, to find out to eavesdrop on your kids or talk to your kids in the car on the way to school. So children grow up learning that they're not the center of their parents' attention. One of the most poignant interviews I did was with a young man who talked about how his father used to watch the Sunday games with him and maybe have the Sunday newspaper between them and share the sports section or the news section. And now his father does his email and texts, and it's just not the same. He misses his dad.
So let's turn the tables. What are some of the complaints parents shared with you about their children being distracted by their cell phones and other devices?
Well, parents then suffer the slings and arrows of not having their children's attention. And I think that what's the big change I see now is that parents are starting to accept, really over the past 2 years, a little bit of the responsibility for that. It's hard to get your child's attention because your child doesn't want, for example, to answer your calls. Your child will only respond to a text message. This is a very common complaint of parents. Children during dinner will want to text. It's very hard to get them to come to dinner and eat. And so I suggest to parents that they use dinners as really sacred spaces where they say, look, dinner is a time when we come together as a family. And
sacred spaces. Before we move off this dinner table conversation, I was listening to another interview with Sherry Turkle with Krista Tippett on Being. And I was particularly struck by the depth of the angst and the awareness of children, even teens, the people who are supposed to not want their parents around, right? I have a recent teen too, 20-year-old who'd be like, we don't need you, right? You're supposed to not want your parents around. I want to listen in to what Sherry Turkle had to say when talking with Krista Tippett on this topic about these sacred spaces. Okay, we're going to start at, I gotta make sure we're starting at 2183. Hold on.
Sherry Turkle founded and directs the intriguingly titled MIT Initiative on Technology and Self. She made waves with her book, Alone Together. It was widely reviewed as a call to unplug our digital gadgets. But
Hold on 1 second, because there's supposed to be a little thing that comes up.
Sherry Turkle founded...
We're going to 2138. Here we go.
friends back, friends, I want to tell them I'm coming. Every place you are with your children, you can't say it's a sacred space. You can't, right. That doesn't fly. But I think that for families as they grow up, I do feel strongly about this because really this dinner table thing has been such a theme in my research, such a theme as teenagers look back on their lives and what they miss. It's teenagers who say, my parents text at the dinner table.
Right.
And there's a story in my book. This young man has a mother who's a gourmet cook. So her pleasure is in making these long, many-course meals, and that's how she shows her love for her family. And she's married to a kind of master of the universe, kind of Wall Street type guy. And he's on his BlackBerry all through dinner. And their son starts to try to negotiate with the mother. Could she prepare shorter meals so that then maybe the father would put away the BlackBerry, but he's not going to do it if it's a 4-course meal. But maybe he would do it if it was basically just soup and salad. Or maybe he would do it if it was just salad and a grilled steak. And you see a teenager trying to negotiate some way to get this BlackBerry out of the dinner table. And it's touching.
I highly encourage you, if you're interested in this topic and in listening to this whole interview. She goes on shortly after this. I mean, the whole thing is fabulous. She talks more about these sacred spaces. She talks about Jon Kabat-Zinn, survival, boundaries, about how we intentionally can create those sacred spaces in this world where we are in love with our technology. We're going to come back to this now. So, to the question, is this an actual addiction? Are we addicted to our technology, or are we just making a whole host of really bad choices? Really interesting question. For some, according to our research, the addiction is real. Some would argue, although Sherry Turkle does not at this point. She does not like to talk about technology as an addiction. It's going to be fun to check in with her over the next couple years. She was in town last year, and we got to meet her and chat with her. She thinks calling it an addiction is a cop-out. Like we can't make the changes, or the changes are too hard to make, that it's too powerful to overcome without significant intervention or help. What is the early research telling us on this? And I say early because we still are really early in this big human experiment. What we know is that there are physical and psychological distresses when withdrawing from our devices. So on Thursday, hopefully you'll take up the Mindfulness Weekend and unplug for even a day, but I would encourage you to take it further, because we know that once you start to feel withdrawal from something, you're likely to go back to it until you come over those withdrawal symptoms, and then you see what's on the other side. There are changes in our behaviors. I encourage you to think about yourself. Have you changed your daily behaviors? Are there things about your social lives, your academic life, where tech is interfering? It's not serving you to be your best self. Regardless of whether you buy the argument that at some level we've created an addiction-like appetite and a relationship with our phones, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Snapchat, here is a fact about addiction that many of you might know just from knowing something about addiction, just generally. For most who overcome addiction of any kind, on the other side of it is a sense of liberation. There's a sense of freedom that comes from saying, okay, I love something a lot. I like how I feel when I use it. And when you get on the other side of it, you are freed from how that thing has been holding you down. If you want to read some really interesting pieces, just go on the Google machine and look up people who have gone off Facebook for a year and talked about that process and what it was like, or taken a break from Twitter for 2 years, what it's like to come back and use it again. They talk about it in these terms of withdrawal, of the same kind of withdrawal that addicts talk about. So during this Tommies Unplugged week, during this being more mindful about tech week, I want to leave you with these questions. Would you feel more liberated if you could change your tech habits? Would you significantly, if you significantly altered your Twitter habits, or unwound your beloved Snapchat routine, or actually read a book without thinking about checking your Facebook feed? Would you like that? Are you able to sit for 7 or 10 or 20 or 40 minutes and just sit and do nothing else but breathe? Are you sure you could do that? One of the most shocking studies that I've read, I'm going to use that word, pun intended, some of you know about it, was, whoops, I like that slide, was the study that asked college students to come into a room. Would you come? And we'll even pay you $20 or a small amount of money to just sit quietly, do nothing, no book, no technology, no nothing. Students are like, sure, why not? Sign me up. And so they brought them into a room and they said, oh, and if you want, at any point, you could give yourself an electric shock, a little painful shock. And the students were like, well, why would I want to do that? They're like, no, just, if you want to, you can. So they set them next to this and showed them how to use it. How many minutes on average do you think it took before the students sitting quietly needed to feel something, needed some little buzz, even if it was painful? They were so bored by the little boring bits. How many minutes on average do you think it took them? 20? You've read the written. 7 minutes. Zap. What? When you're addicted to that kind of stimulation, and we know the research, again, I'm using addicted, that neurochemical reaction, we got our neuroscientist in the room, maybe she can help with the Q&A. When you are withdrawing from that, any kind of stimulation will take its place. I don't know if tech is an addiction. What I do know, and what the research is suggesting, is that we have to develop a more self-aware relationship with our technology, with our digital devices, if we want to be healthier, if we want great relationships and marriages and be better parents and be better employees and our brains functioning at a higher rate. And I'm going to end right now by asking you the question I ask all of my students, which is, with whom do you want to have your closest relationship? With a device or with another human being? And I ask you to ask yourself, and I ask my students to ask themselves this every day when we choose to turn to our devices more often or in ways that we think are satisfying, when maybe, perhaps, we should be turning toward other humans. So I'm going to end there, and we have a couple minutes 6 minutes for questions and answers. I didn't see anyone texting during this lecture. Way to go. Positive rewards. And if you did it so subtly, I didn't even notice. Did anyone live tweet anything? I don't even know how to do that. So Q&A, we have a microphone. We're asking you to use it because this is being recorded, and then your question can be captured. Anyone, question or comment or experience or feeling so much angst you just have to say it out loud right now? Like, ooh, the world is ending. We have one over here. You want to take it?
Hi, my name's Tyler. Yesterday I was having dinner with a couple of my friends, and for the most part we're pretty good about not having our phones out at dinner. But when I brought up this Tommies Unplugged week, and on Thursday the whole going without your phone, going without your technology, there was intense skepticism, to say the least. In fact, there's a lot of saying like, oh, I can't be away from my phone. I have to check my email. I have to be there to look at Facebook or to check my messages. What if I get a notification? How do you respond to that?
I hand them a copy of Sherry Turkle's book, Reclaiming Conversation. No, it's a great question. We have these conversations. I know, Karen, you need to leave. We have these conversations in class too, like as you start to take all this in and you realize and you read the research or you've experienced it yourself and you're like, but I'm just one little tiny, speck in this big planet. How do I convince others? It's a really good question. I think, as Sherry Turkle says, we're at a crossroads. We're at a crossroads right now. And it's about having more conversations. So you're not going to convince everybody. One of the things we know about humans is that our behavior affects others. So what we do, whether we know it right now or not, it is influencing others. So I would say, you say to them, I'm going to try this. hear some research, become more educated about it, share what you know, and then do it yourself and be that change that you want to see. You're not going to convince them all right away until maybe they experience it themselves. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. One more comment or question? Yes. Give Chris some exercise.
I've known a clinical psychiatrist for a number of years, many years, and I run into him every once in a while, and I'd always ask him, well, what is the addiction that you're treating now? And he went through all the different alcohol over the years. And about a year and a half ago, I asked him, and he says, well, by far now, technology addiction. And he says it's tearing marriages apart and tearing kids apart from their parents, and it's really an addiction. And he's getting referrals from employers who are saying we're either going to terminate this employee or they're going to go through treatment for this technology addiction, which is they're not a productive employee.
Mm-hmm. And I would say even in the last 2 years, the research I'm reading is leaning more heavily in that direction. I am very curious what Sherry Turkle would say, even in this last year. So, and you can hear her on a number of interviews. If you just Google machine Sherry Turkle, and she's all over the place talking about this work. She's just such a great clearinghouse on all the latest research. I'm seeing the shift even in the last year or two. And you know that the research that we're seeing out there published, that research was probably done 4 or 5 years ago, by the time it made it into the journals and then made it out there for us to consume it. We really are in the middle of a big digital experiment. And so I would say, what kind of variable do you want to be? And again, for our children especially, do we want our children to be those people who are begging us to put away our phones? That to me has been the biggest sort of tide shift. It's not the young people who are the biggest problems. It's the people like the mother I saw the other day changing her baby in the women's room at a local restaurant on her phone the whole time while changing the baby. One of the things we know about that research of eye contact with infants, that the blank face syndrome, this idea of baby looking at a blank face, not good for brain wiring, whatever the words are from the neuroscientists. And yet we seem like these little moments, but what a baby sees, let's say we're nursing a baby and we're just going to, check Facebook because it's a downtime. That baby opens his or her eyes and looks at our blank face. We know, again, over time, in experiment, that's not good. Tough questions. It's 1 o'clock. Thank you so much. You should see your faces. You've been so attentive. How many people in here are disturbed right now? A little disturbed. Good. That's a motivator. Thank you for being here.